The following is a lecture by Professor Aron Culotta, hosted by the AI in the Liberal Arts Initiative. Scan the QR codes on screen to learn more, or go to www.liberal-arts.ai.
Okay, I'm going to begin and we'll have some more people kind of trickling in. But thanks everyone for joining us today. My name's Ari King and I coordinate Amherst College's AI in the Liberal Arts Initiative. And I just want to thank you all for joining us for another installment of our Spring Learning and Discussion series. Since we were founded just a few years back, we've worked pretty hard to engage audiences in our interdisciplinary conversations about artificial intelligence, as well as its kind of intersections across the liberal arts. Today's conversation, we're going to focus on what happens when academics connect their knowledge and skills in AI to help community organizations advance their work. Leading the charge in some of this work is someone from my own alma mater, Tulane University in New Orleans, Professor Aron Culotta. Dr. Culotta is the director of Tulane's Center for Community Engaged AI, as well as an associate professor of computer science. Very briefly, Dr. Culotta's research investigates computational methods to discover socially beneficial knowledge from text and social networks. So this can be applied to things like tracking diseases, measuring the effectiveness of public health campaigns, as well as things like detecting deceptive marketing and whatnot. Our conversation will be structured. It's going to start with a presentation from Dr. Culotta about his work in New Orleans and with the center at Tulane. And then we're going to follow that up with some questions and discussions from two more of our guests who I'd also like to introduce. We have Kirsten Helmer, who serves as the organizational lead for the Teaching for Inclusiveness, Diversity, and Equity Ambassadors Fellowship in the Manning Prize for Excellence in Teaching at UMass-Amherst. Helmer leads workshops and develops resources and works with departments and colleges on inclusive teaching practices and course design, as well as conducting midterm assessments and teaching consultations. In addition to Kirsten Helmer, we'll be joined by Dan Cannity, who is currently a manager of instructional design and support at UMass-Amherst as well. And Dan's graduate work in sociology focused on digital literacies and digital skill acquisition with a lens towards equity. And so I'll also mention that Dr. Culotta is a UMass-Amherst alum as well. So we have a very UMass event today. I also wanted to say, over the last 2 semesters, Kirsten and Dan have been putting together an incredible discussion group over at UMass. So we have seasoned discussants here with us today. And their discussion group in many ways was the inspiration for some of the programming we're putting together at AILA this semester. So thank you for their leadership and what they're doing to build and continue more conversations around artificial intelligence. Before we jump into the conversation, I just wanted to cover a few quick logistics. First, this event is being recorded for those who cannot attend today. And shortly after the event, the recording will be shared on the AILA, that's AILA at Amherst YouTube channel. And it will also be on our website. So you can check back on our website to view that recording. Also, I want to encourage you to subscribe to AILA's newsletter. I'll put the link for that in the chat to get announcements about other AI-related events like this in the future. We do a pretty good balance of virtual and in-person things. So yeah, we'd love to have you join and learn more in the coming weeks. Yeah, without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Aron to talk about his work. Aron, thank you so much for being here with us today.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be back in town virtually. Sorry I missed the snow. I'm going to, yeah, like Ariana said, share a few slides here for about 20 minutes to talk a little bit about the work we've been doing here. I should preface this by saying, like, of course, this is all new stuff that people are trying to figure out, and we certainly don't have all the answers. But I want to tell you a little bit about how we're approaching this, and kind of what's worked and what hasn't. And I look forward to our conversation today. So, just to start, obviously this crowd's here, so you're pretty familiar with all of the amazing things that AI can do now, whether it's in the medical field, whether it's in disaster response, whether it's games, software development, or our friends over at OpenAI. So all this machine learning data and computational power and money has led to a lot of amazing advances in the field. Of course, if you open the paper on any given day or click on a paper, there's many things that could go wrong as well, obviously, right? Whether it's facial recognition gone wrong, whether it's gender bias in recruiting tools, whether it's, nowadays we're seeing chatbots being kind of layered on top of all kind of services, and these can go wrong in many ways. There was another headline this morning for one in Washington. So obviously there's technical problems here, there's social problems here, and kind of the motivation for the group we have here at Tulane, this community engaged AI, is that one of the many reasons we see kind of AI going wrong is that it is typically developed pretty far away from the people who are actually most affected by them, right? And there's little oversight and transparency into how the system works or doesn't. And the fact that this technology is so quickly evolving, right? Like even researchers can't keep up with what's happening, that, anyone who's trying to make claims about accuracy or equity of these different systems, it's going to be really challenging to kind of stay up to date with that over time. So part of our kind of thought process here is that it's not just the algorithms themselves that we need to look into. We need to rethink just the way in which these algorithms are developed and deployed, right? So the idea is to have a more human-centered development practice if we want these algorithms to be socially beneficial. And in particular, if we want to be able to earn the trust of the communities that are being affected by these systems, then we would like the design process to be equitable, transparent, and accountable, to establish meaningful relationships with many stakeholders affected by the system, and ideally be used to augment rather than replace the human interaction that we all need. And I will be the first to say there's no reason that a computer scientist should be the one doing all these things. That is not our training. And so part of what we tried to do with the center was to be very cross-disciplinary, both within academia and outside of the academy, to really just bring different modes of inquiry to this issue. So the center, the core faculty focused on the center are myself, my colleague Nick Matei in computer science, Andre Boyles in sociology, Patrick Button in economics, and then Alessandra and Karen from public health. And we're continuing to expand, of course, to different fields and areas. But, I think for this core, our goal was to at least get different perspectives on the roles of AI in society. Public health in particular, if you think about previous cases where we've developed technology that society had trouble buying into, given the potential for wrongdoing, medicine's a great case of that, right? And so the field of medicine and public health has a lot of history in how do you do community-driven development. Andrea Boyles is great, and in fact, we had to really twist her arm to be on this because her position is often like AI just should not be used, period, full stop. And she's like, why would I join your center about AI if I don't like AI? And so that's exactly why, because we need those countervailing opinions on this thing. So that's a little bit about, and this was funded by the Office of Research here at Tulane. And this was founded not last September, but the prior one, so 22. And of course, our research areas cover a lot of different areas that we think would be relevant to this domain. So our aspiration kind of the center is kind of twofold. One, to develop new, as I said, human-centered design mechanisms so that community members can have an influence both in the creation and oversight of algorithms. And that involves things about how do you model multiple stakeholders, how do you measure and mitigate bias, what are the control mechanisms. But then we're also very focused on specific application areas, particular things in public health, criminal justice, employment and housing discrimination, and that's also folds in with the different folks we have involved. So I wanted to mention just three kind of things that we've done in the past, year and a half or two, kind of along these lines. So the first was, well, if we want to do community engaged AI, we should probably engage with the community. And what do we mean by community, and what do we mean by engagement? So the first thing we did was hold a kind of an open forum discussion presentation. We called it Artificial Intelligence Risks and Benefits for Local Communities. We had a number of folks in the New Orleans area, people who run different nonprofits, people who run community organizations, who were curious in this topic. And we really wanted it to be kind of a back and forth, like not just us standing up there and saying, here's what AI does, here's where it's good and bad, but to really have more of a brainstorming session, like, well, you are, focused on criminal justice. What are some ways that you think AI could help you with your work? What are some fears you have about how AI may make your work harder, right? And so part of that was kind of a structured brainstorming session we had where we asked folks, what does the future of AI look like for your community? And, it's funny, I was saying to Ariana earlier, I just came from another panel talking about AI, and, I think there's this strong pessimism around AI lately, which is justifiable in many cases. But what was interesting is that, the folks at this particular event were I found on the whole more optimistic than maybe you would guess from academia. Again, if you're a nonprofit, you're hustling to, make an impact. Like having these tools that seem to be doing amazing things, help you with your work seems like a real great potential, right? So whether that's in things like education, whether it's in health, housing, et cetera, there actually, we found a lot of strong optimism about ways this could help. Of course, there's a lot of challenges, right? Issues of equity came up quite a bit. Issues of, the technology divide, right? That sort of thing. Another thing that came up a lot was data ownership. What happens when I upload my data to this thing? Do I lose control over it? And I thought that was a particularly interesting one. For those of you who know much about New Orleans, one of our rich traditions is called Mardi Gras Indians or Black Masking Indians. And they make these insanely elaborate, beautiful costumes every year, and they kind of march and parade a couple of days a year. And they were kind of at the ground floor on this data appropriation thing, like people come and take pictures of them and then sell them, and they don't get any proceeds from it. So they've been worried about data, losing control of their data and copyrighting their data and their image and likeness for quite a long time. And of course, we're seeing that come up again now that our AI systems are generating images based on this other data. Okay, sorry. Okay, so one part, and we continue to do this, of course. I think these outreach events where we literally just try to bring in different perspectives and different folks in the same room is great, both for understanding kind of the potential strengths and weaknesses, risks of these methods, but also brainstorming project, like hands-on project ideas comes out of these sessions. And so I want to talk about two in the time I have here. The first is with an amazing organization in New Orleans called Court Watch. And there's a few Court Watch-like organizations throughout the country. So you may have seen this before. What they do is quite literally in their name, like they have thousands of volunteers over a course of multiple years that literally just go into the courtroom and observe what happens. And they fill out a form about things about, how is the defendant being treated? How is the judge's demeanor? Did they ask if the defendant could afford bond, right? Many, many types of variables. Of course, in Orleans Parish, you can't bring a digital device, so they have to do this on paper and then upload it to a digital system and whatnot. So it's a really valuable resource, and they do an amazing job just for the transparency of what's going on in the court system. And so what we want to do is work with them and figure out, how can we kind of build some data infrastructure to make their jobs easier? And then B, is there any way that AI could help them with their jobs? And this is all a work in progress, but the first piece is really, it's very much a data science, data integration thing, right? So you have all of these volunteer court observations I was talking about. You also have court dockets, right? So there is some public data available about what's happening in the court system, what are the charges in different cases, that sorts of thing. And then you also have these kind of one-off public records requests where you want to say, like, for example, the risk scores is a big issue, right? So give me all the risk scores that were used for this set of cases when determining things like bail amounts and sentencing. So just integrating all that data into a coherent database, is valuable on its own, and that's something we spent, a year or two working with them to do that. And the result of that is now you have a pretty rich set of data, so you can search, over time, search by cases along different attributes for bond amounts. You can browse through case level information. And then you can also start to look at things like equity, right? So if you want to know how has the bond amount varied by race in for a particular query, like a particular type of charge or a particular time period, you can start to do that. And by the way, I don't know if any of you work in criminal justice, right? It was shocking to me how that you could not do this. Like, if I wanted to know what the bond amount was by race for a particular charge, like you couldn't do that in Orleans. Maybe you can do it elsewhere, I'm not sure. So for sure, one of the great benefits to me of these types of projects is I learned so much from all the hard work that these community organizations are doing. I learned so much about kind of how things work, right, in the real world, and what are the issues and what are the problems that we face. Okay, so that was kind of the first part, is like, well, let's just get this data into one place so we can actually start to do some analysis on it. And we have tried to integrate, with CourtWatch's website so they can kind of generate some, track some of this data over time for the sake of transparency. But going forward, one thing we're interested in doing is, well, how can we use AI to better monitor and understand human decision-making? So, normally when I say AI in criminal justice, people think about these risk scores, right? That like predict whether or not this person will recidivate. And that's not what I'm arguing for here. Rather than trying to replace or augment human decision-making like in the criminal court, instead of, we're trying to understand how those decisions were made. And these are like fundamental, social science questions that people have looked at for a long time, right? Like, what impact does this person's record or race or gender or age have on things like their bond amounts, their plea deals, whether they're convicted, et cetera, right? And so to me, this is a broad area that AI can help in many types of like civic decision-making. Once we can observe different steps in this decision-making process, we can then use neural network models to help dig into these questions more deeply. What do I mean by that? Just briefly, you're all probably familiar with language models to some degree that are essentially just, trying to predict the next word in a sentence, right? And the big thing you get out of these models is this learned representation, which is summarizing the sentence or document that preceded it. And these representations are then used for other tasks like question answering, classification, et cetera. So thinking about this generally beyond just language is sometimes called foundational models, by which they mean you train this model to do some task that you don't really care about, right? Which is like predicting the next word is not really that valuable. But as a byproduct, you get this rich representation of the data with which you can solve other tasks. So we're seeing this happen now in healthcare, for example, where people are building these foundational models to summarize a patient's entire history so that you can do things like question answering, et cetera. So one thing to look at it is, how can we do this in criminal court? So if we have lots of data where we have information about the defendants, different cases, different decisions made in those cases, right? If we fit a model to kind of predict many steps along that way, can we now have a rich representation of like that's summarizing this person's interactions with the court system up to that time point? What could we do with such a thing? And I think there's at least two things you can do. One is causal analysis, right? So there's a lot of interesting research lately trying to adapt neural networks to estimate things like, what is the impact of race on bond amount? And so that's a counterfactual thing. Like if I had switched, doesn't make sense, right? But if you had switched this property from black to white, for example, how would that have affected the bond amount? So there's some interesting neural network approaches one can do here to more rigorously quantify the effect of these things. Another thing that you can do with a model like this is to look for outliers, right? So one thing I've learned from my colleagues at CourtWatch is just the innumerable ways that things can go wrong in the court system. Like, so literally people appearing for the same charge, appearing multiple times in court, not realizing that it's for the same charge, which of course violates the Constitution. So finding outliers, which for example, it might be like, I expected the bond to be set at 2K, but it was set at 10K. Like, what was different about this case? Was it an error, or was it an indication of something else going on? So I think these predictive models can be used for these kind of transparency purposes beyond just doing the like risk score kind of thing that we've seen a lot of recently. Okay, so I have about 4 or 5 minutes left, so I want to talk about the second use case real quick. And so this first use case, is kind of probably what you would expect when I say we're going to go work with nonprofits. Like they have some data, they need help organizing that data and kind of doing analytics on it. But I would emphasize that especially as the bar for using AI tools drops, we're going to see a lot more like the second case that I'm going to tell you about, where the nonprofit itself built their own AI system, like in 3 months. And it's a really cool AI system. So this is with Ayub and Marvin from an organization called Eye on Surveillance here in New Orleans that are focused on things like facial recognition laws. And the problem they faced was they wanted to do a public records request to figure out how is facial recognition being used by the police force, and what do we know about kind of its success rate, for example, by some definition of success. And to do a public records request, you can't just say, give me everything you have about facial recognition. You have to say like, no, there's this one report I want to be able to see. And the problem is you can't sit in city council all day and listen to everybody speak until you finally find like, oh, here's the one we actually care about. So what did they do? So they built a chatbot that sucks in transcripts of all of city council meetings. And actually I can show you, here's what it looks like. It's salt.us. So you can enter in a question and say things like, what is the city council doing about trash pickup or about short-term rentals? And you get back an answer that includes, is a very long ChatGPT backed answer, along with citations to actual minutes from the meetings where those things happened. Okay. So it's a really cool system. And here they have some kind of like sample questions and answers here. There's a little bit of a lag, it's a couple minutes to get the responses. But you can actually see the citations, that the system finds there. So those of you who, follow this is a RAG system, retrieval augmented generation, where step 1 is retrieve a bunch of documents relevant to the question. Step 2 is package those up with a prompt to ChatGPT and say, answer this question, but use these documents in your response, right? And so this is one way to try to reduce that hallucination problem that we've heard so much about, by saying like, you must use these documents in your answer. So this is a really great system they built, and we kind of came in just as they were kind of getting to the beta testing. And one thing we wanted to work with them with was, okay, how do we tell this thing works? How do we evaluate the quality of this system and make sure that the people who will be using it are satisfied with the results? So one thing we did was just build a little feedback tool here, so you can see different answers to the same question and rate it along different things like accuracy, helpfulness, and balance. And we then had several community sessions where we brought 20 or 30 folks from different organizations around town to generate their own questions, look at the responses, and evaluate the quality of the responses. And one thing you might do with this is test out different model parameters to see how they affect humans' evaluation. There's one parameter we're calling K here, which is like how many passages am I using to create the answer to the question? So that first phase of gather snippets relevant to the question. And one kind of counterintuitive result to me was that actually the more snippets you used as inputs to the answer, actually the less people liked it typically. And we're still digging into why. It may have something to do with kind of the answer being too diffuse, as opposed to kind of like taking a stand on one particular answer. But one big issue that came up as we were looking at this is, how do you answer a question like, is facial recognition effective for reducing crime? Like, which are exactly the types of questions people are entering into this system. So that's a nearly impossible question to answer, but what would you want the chatbot to do? And I think what you want it to do is to say, for contentious issues like that, like, here is how this group of people would answer that, and here is how that group of people would answer that. And without being too wishy-washy, try to summarize different parts of the debate, right? So this issue when they first developed the system that it was very biased towards thing the city council said. And so like, if you said, how's the city council, reducing crime? And it would say like, the city council is doing an amazing job reducing crime by actions A, B, and C. And there's some technical reasons for why that would happen. But one of the things we're continuing to look at is how can we track issues of like bias and different perspectives in the answers that these systems give. There's another interesting research area that sounds like it shouldn't work, where you use language models to evaluate the output of other language models. So for example, you can give it the question and the answer, and then another language model looks at it and says, how relevant is this answer to the question? And you can get different scores based on that. You can also do things like, how readable is this answer? How many different opinions does this answer have to this question, right? So one of the things we're working on with this group is figuring out what is kind of like a suite of tests we can create. Can we measure how reliable they are? And then can we use them, can we deploy them so that in real time, we can tell, is the system kind of staying on track, or is it kind of, are there certain questions where we feel like the quality is poor? And I think this whole issue of evaluating LLMs is going to be a huge one because we're going to see these being used in all sorts of settings imminently. Okay, so I'll conclude on just two brief notes. One, and I think we'll talk about this in the discussion, like there's this meta issue of how do you do projects like this, because academia generally doesn't really reward this kind of work, right? Like we need publications and grants. So there's a few things that have helped us here. One, we have a service learning program here at Tulane. I believe you have it at Amherst and UMass as well. And so our senior capstone project in computer science, we run a service learning section where we exactly do these types of projects. And it's particularly great for that first level of like, let's get the data, let's integrate the data, let's build some dashboards. The students are great at that. And the nonprofits we work with typically need that kind of work. The center I've talked about is another mechanism, right? That is providing funding so that we can bring in a group of different type of scientists to work on these types of problems. And then as we are able to build these long-term relationships, we're able to build trust with these different organizations, then we can start looking at these larger proposals. And I've been happy to see that the NSF has been starting to fund this type of work. So I've just listed a few here that really are geared towards this type of work. And so that is another encouraging sign that this sort of work is becoming fundable in different scientific mechanisms. Center for Public Service is our group here at Tulane that manages the service learning kind of component of our curriculum. They do amazing work, both training faculty and students. How do you go out and engage with a community that maybe you are not used to engaging with? I think that's a critical thing that we can talk about more. These seed grants to encourage these initiatives. And just to conclude, I just want to say that this has been just some of the most exciting and rewarding work I've been able to do in my career, and I'm really happy that Tulane has been supportive of this, and I'm looking forward to seeing this type of work, happen more and more across different universities. So with that, I'll stop blabbing, and I look forward to chatting with you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much for that presentation, Aron. I'm gonna open it up, turn it over to Kirsten and Dan to supply a few questions.
Oops, sorry, hang on. I got to remember to unmute myself here. All right. So thank you so much for that. It's all really exciting stuff. I think one of the first questions that we have is sort of thinking about all that you've just described and all that you're doing. Can you talk about how your personal journey with AI began for using it in these community engagement spaces? And along that line, what's unique about engaging with communities and partnerships when AI enters that work?
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so yeah, I'm a UMass grad. I got my PhD in computer science, focused on natural language processing. Back in those olden days, what the natural language that we processed was typically news articles. Right after I graduated, that's when things like Twitter became popular. And so I started applying those NLP things to social media data. And that was really the first time where I kind of realized like, oh, this stuff, like, there's a lot of real interesting social things that we can learn about with natural language processing that maybe we wouldn't have had the tools for before. So that got me kind of down this path of more interdisciplinary work, working with like communications people and political science people and public health people in that kind of domain where you have this data about humans, essentially. Somewhat after that, when I first started being faculty, actually, the University of Chicago was one of the first to have one of these data science for social good programs. Raed Ghani led that. Now he's at CMU. And I was one of the mentors for one of those summer programs where, yeah, the whole point was like, we have all these super smart people sitting in a room for a summer, working with different nonprofits, trying to build, in that case, data science solutions for things they were working on. And that was a really well-run program. I believe UMass has something similar, and I know there's a lot of those types of organizations now. And that was really inspirational for me to figure out like, oh, like how do you structure these things? And how do you engage with nonprofits and similar and governmental organizations in a way that's that's actually deep and not just this short-term drive-by kind of situation. So I think those experiences were some that definitely kind of led me down this path. And when I got to Tulane in 2020, that's why we kind of started this service learning component to the capstone, because I wanted to figure out, well, I don't want to just do like a summer program, A, because it's a lot of work, and B, because it's only 3 months. How can we make something that'll continue so that I can have a long-term relationship with these different organizations? I think you had another question, but I forgot what it was.
Yeah, sort of what's unique about engaging these community partnerships when AI gets involved?
Yeah, I guess unique as opposed to like any other type of engagement with a nonprofit, right? So, gosh, I don't know. I mean, obviously there's just like, it seems like there's greater risks than reward, right? Like if I was going to go in and, I don't know, do like a training session or, the fact that we're building systems that are going to be used as part of their day-to-day work. That's true of data science as well as AI. It's a challenge. When I first approach different organizations, I do try to say like, don't give us your core function. Don't ask us to build the thing that your entire enterprise relies upon. Use us for like the wouldn't it be nice if kind of projects. Again, because we're, it's academics, it's students, we're building things best we can, but we're not full-time employees of your organization. So that's been a tough line to walk, is to try to figure out like, well, we want to do cool things, but we're also know that, we're separate from your organization. So we're kind of like consultants in some way. And so I think when you talk about AI and all that can go right and wrong with those, kind of raises the stakes of those kind of relationships.
All right, thank you. And sort of following up on that, for anyone that wanted to get started, either someone in computer science building relationships, and wanting to get involved in community engaged or community organizations, or vice versa, someone who's got a community organization, they're like, we just have so much data, we don't know what to do with it, and they want to get involved. What advice would you give them as far as important first steps? Sort of what are the things they should be looking at?
Yeah, so certainly from the student side, like going to volunteer and going to learn about that organization. I mean, that's certainly something we face with these capstones, right? Is like, and myself as well. Like, I don't know anything about law. Like, what am I doing working on criminal justice, right? And so this is true as any technologist. You're entering a domain that you are not an expert in, and so you'll never be an expert necessarily in that other domain, but you need to make sure you're doing your best to do your homework and study up and meet and speak with those people who are kind of down in the trenches every day working on that area. So from the student side, that's my first piece of advice. From the, I guess, nonprofit or other organizations side, yeah, it's tough. I mean, again, we're holding these outreach events with the whole purpose of like opening those dialogues and get those conversations going. For sure, always the first roadblock is data, right? Like, are we collecting the right data? Are we storing it in the right way? Because you're going to spend the first year just getting everything kind of in a right position. And I know, again, we've talked with organizations of different sizes. Some of them have their own like data team and others don't, right? And so it can be a challenge for sure. But to the extent that you can start building up data literacy and data competency in-house, I think that'll make it much easier to engage with these sorts of different groups.
All right, and one last thing, we're still on that sort of getting started, but what do you wish you had known when you were beginning this work?
Gosh. I guess a lot of things. I mean, for all of these, like I said earlier, there's always the domain expertise, right? Like, so there's so much about the court system I don't know. There's so much about how city council works that I didn't know, right? So all that stuff that I'm learning from the community organization, is something I'm definitely learning as part of that. I think just issues of there's a lot of issues of privacy and transparency in all of this kind of work, right? And like, on the one hand, we want to be as transparent as possible. Like, that's our goal, is to share this information so that we can have a more informed decision making. On the other hand, it's a challenge. Like, what data can you reveal? Private information, that sort of stuff. So, just issues about how do you properly data stewardship, those sorts of things are things that really you need to think about a lot before embarking on any of this stuff.
All right. Thank you so much for those answers. It's really exciting. And I'm going to hand things over to Kirsten now.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Thank you, Aron. I think this is just so fascinating, the work that you're doing. And you already mentioned the student side as you were responding to Dan about what you wish you had known, and mentioned going in to volunteer and to learn, and really acknowledging you're not an expert in certain domains. For me as a faculty and educational developer, what I find so inspiring about your work is that it really shifts the focus away from, oh, AI is here just to replace us, or for students to cheat or whatnot, but really to put it in service of communities and helping them use AI, and that it can really be for social benefits. My question related to that, or rather two questions, is, so as you bring in students to do this different kind of community engaged work, so how do you support them in developing these critical thinking skills, in ethical reasoning skills, and also in analyzing the societal impacts of AI on these communities, because what I heard was that it goes both ways, right? You use AI to make sense of data, but AI is also being used, for example, in facial recognition and brings up a lot of issues. So how do you do this work with the students?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. It's something we're, figuring out. But but a couple of things have helped. So again, I mentioned the Center for Public Service that have, training sessions to help think about what does it mean to do service learning, the fact that it's a two-way street, the fact that you're going into a community that you're not familiar with, right? So we're Tulane, mostly wealthy, mostly white, mostly not from New Orleans is our student population, right? Going into under-resourced, mostly Black communities, right? So there's all kind of things that can go wrong with this situation, right? And so we do take that very seriously and try to put in training mechanisms. We have a lot of discussions internally before we're even allowed to kind of go out into the community, as it were. But then I do think it really is an amazing opportunity for these students to learn about what these different organizations are doing. I'll give one example, the chatbot example I was talking about. So the students were working on that evaluation mechanism and trying to detect issues of bias in the response of the chatbot. And so at one of these community meetings, the students had to present like what they were working on and how they were going to try to address bias. And the three students, were all white. And so one of the audience members raised their hand and said, so why are you the one who gets to decide what's fair and equitable in this response? And they were like, right. And they handled it very well. But I think those are important moments, right, for students to get out there and understand the different perspectives on these problems, and that, getting them out of this technocentric approach to solving everything. I think these engagements are really impactful for that. So part of it's training, part of it's trying to like take baby steps and trying to really just let them get out there and learn about the world from these organizations.
Yeah, it's really intriguing how this is happening with the use of AI. So again, like kind of shifting the narrative and really showing that we can engage students in ways that are really intriguing and also socially benefiting communities. So you're involved in the center. You have certain colleagues involved. You mentioned one of your colleagues is rather kind of opposing AI and how that in itself is really beneficial. So as you try to maybe pull in other colleagues into this work, what do you tell them, like what the benefits might be to get involved in this and how to get started? Right now you have more the social sciences. I'm also thinking like, how would you bring in, for example, somebody from the humanities to engage with this type of work?
Yeah, great question. So we do want to continue to expand humanities, law, business, like are obvious areas. One mechanism we're using, we have some like seed funds, like I was talking about, kind of for like summer projects that are good for like kickstarting these projects. And of course, center folks would collaborate with them, as needed to help them along with that. But I think, without people are busy, right? And they all have a million projects. And you can't just say like, oh, you two should go work together and figure this out, right? There needs to be some carrot to help people do that. And so, these seed funds, I think, help with that. I think you need to, have a mechanism by which, the humanities person or the law person is sitting down with other folks to try to think about, great. I mean, I was just talking to a law student today and they had all these amazing ideas about different projects. And, my question is always like, okay, where's the data, right? But yeah, so I think there's tons of opportunities across all those different areas. I think seed funds, I think these outreach events help people kind of come together and, students are the glue, right? Students are the glue that allow projects to get off the ground. And I think this funding helps motivate those students to do that.
Yeah, thank you for that. What I just heard was also to listen to our students and invite them in and to hear what ideas they might have, and then to bring in faculty from their disciplines maybe, but to
Absolutely.
yeah, to really listen to students as well. Thank you so much. I think I'm going to give it back if we have to for one last question from Dan, and I think then Ariana, you're going to open it to the audience.
All right. So I think this is pretty broad, and I think you've touched on some of these, but what do you see as the greatest challenge when working with communities and engaging with AI, and how do you approach overcoming that one big challenge? And I know it's hard to choose, and you sort of outlined a few of them, but
Mhm.
if you had to, what would you identify?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, yeah, I mean, think as a data scientist, it's usually data infrastructure, right? Like what you want to make an impact. If you want to make an impact in the community and there's some data-driven aspect to that, how do you get the data? How do you make sure that the data is representative of the problem you care about, right? How do you build a mechanism to continually to collect that data over time, right? We're talking about AI, and so, you know, that's its fuel. And that's a challenge for cash-strapped institutions that may have, like, you know, 5 people working at them. Like, how do you can't come in and say, please build a data infrastructure. So that's a huge one that, you know, I think we'll see across all of these. And then the other big one, just kind of more AI specifically, is yeah, it comes back to kind of the auditing and evaluation. Like, how are we sure that this AI system is doing what we want it to do? How do we make sure we're not replacing that human connection that these organizations rely upon, right? That's what they're great at. So we definitely don't want to like automate all the functions of this organization. Our goal is to augment and improve what they're capable of doing. So trying to walk that line, making sure the human computer interaction is good, so that we're kind of lifting things up rather than just, you know, we can do more than just replace the drudgery part. Can we kind of make the whole the greater than the sum of its parts?
All right, thank you so much. That's daunting but inspiring.
Yeah, well said. So I'm going to turn it over to questions from anyone in the audience if you'd like to submit anything. In the meantime, I wanted to ask a little bit about some of the differences between engaging graduate students and undergraduates in this kind of work, and how the program handles that difference, and yeah, and sort of how you move forward with those different positions.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so again, our undergrads are typically through this service learning components. I mean, we have other who just, you know, do independent studies or maybe are funded on different research grants. And then our like PhD students, you know, they're obviously here on RAs, and they're doing research towards their dissertation, right? And so you're right, there is kind of a different balance you have to strike here. I can't have my PhD students spend 3 years like building a database for a nonprofit. Like, that's not going to help them graduate.
Right.
But once the data is in place and there's like, oh, all these interesting models that we might want to use to apply to this data, that's where I think the graduate students come in and can help a lot, where they're using state-of-the-art machine learning AI tools. And this is then, you know, like, again, in computer science, we're typically building new technologies that can be applied to many domains. And so in ideal world, you would structure it so that, you know, this community engaged project is one of their, you know, end domains that they're kind of trying out their new models on. That way they can contribute scientifically towards their dissertation, as well as trying to you know, make an impact on this organization, which is really hard, right? Like, I mean, it's really hard to have an idea that is both like publishable and scientifically interesting and solves this very practical problem like today. But sometimes it happens, but it's a challenge. So yes, for sure, there's kind of different streams for those two different types of students. But that's kind of how we try to work it.
Yeah, thank you for that. Any other questions from folks?
While we wait for folks to maybe figure out how they want to ask their questions, I'll throw out another one. Is just if you're thinking about the tools that you're developing, how do you approach sort of the rapid fire evolution of AI capabilities in terms of keeping the tools that you're using relevant or functional, doing that maintenance work, and then also making sure that it's making the most use of the tools, or the capabilities of newer tools?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's tough. Again, the chatbot I described, where the nonprofit has in-house capabilities in programming. They've been actively like swapping out models, swapping out all these different ways you can structure one of these RAG systems. And so they're constantly updating it. Now, the nice thing about this area, despite the closedness of OpenAI, for the most part, like a lot of these algorithms are open source. Even if the algorithm isn't, the models might be, so you can make API calls to try out different models. So that makes it a little bit easier, right? Like there's a lot of really nice, from an engineering perspective, a lot of nice wrappers kind of written around these tools so that you're working at kind of like a level of abstraction higher. So if it's literally like one line change, and now I'm using this much fancier model rather than this other model, right? Now, again, I come back to evaluation. Great, you made that change. This, research paper said it was going to be better, but is it actually better in your use case, right? And that's why we need that constant evaluation to be able to say, oh, you made this change, but actually now, like it's way more biased than it was before. And so, yeah, I mean, it's kind of a machine learning ops kind of problem of continuing to evaluate in real time the quality of your system.
We have one more question. This is from a former New Orleanian, in terms of how has your work with this program sort of helped you understand the city in new and different ways, and just in seeing the possibilities, how has it sort of changed or deepened any of your interactions in the city, kind of both in your academic work, but then also outside as a New Orleanian.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'm born and raised here. But of course, I still know almost nothing about the city, right? So, again, like I didn't know much about criminal court, didn't know much about how the city council works. Didn't know there's a lot of these issues where I'm constantly learning from these folks and building relationships, right? Like, New Orleans, as you know, is very much a relationship town. And it's been very, rewarding to interact with parts of the city I wouldn't have had an ability to interact with otherwise. So, socially and intellectually, that's been very rewarding. We have as you know, a very rich kind of nonprofits scene here. And not being in that scene myself, this is kind of my network into there. That's been very, very nice.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely such a dynamic landscape of needs and ways that people fit together. So it's when I learned about your work, I was so encouraged and just really wanted to see what was possible. If there's no other questions, I think maybe we will just say thank you to Aron and Kirsten and Dan for your time today, discussing community engaged AI and the possibilities. I know certainly inspiring to hear things working and things happening. I think we often, certainly those of us who talk about AI a lot, we do get caught up in the kind of the negative and the doom and gloom and whatnot. So it looks like there are, you provide a pathway for sort of responsible and really human and relationship centered work in this way. And certainly feels like the possibilities are endless. And so we wish you all the best with the Center for Community Engaged AI, and as you continue to grow and develop, and we'd love to check in with you again. And yeah, thank you again for your time. I know you're, busy talking about this all the time, so we really appreciate you just coming back to the Pioneer Valley for a minute and sharing your work. So thank you, Aron, Kirsten, and Daniel. Thank you so much for your questions and all the work you're doing at UMass as well. So yeah, everyone have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks a lot. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.